I was sitting at my kitchen table at 11:15 on a Tuesday night. I had just accepted a promotion to a director role, but instead of celebrating, my stomach was completely tied in knots. I had my laptop open with 2 different bank tabs and a massive spreadsheet, trying to figure out where my money was actually going. The new salary was $120,000 a year, but the spreadsheet was telling me I somehow had less free cash flow than when I was making $60,000. And that is the moment everything changed for me. My name is David, and I spend way too much time obsessing over the invisible math that makes high earners feel completely broke. If you are someone who feels like you are making more money than ever, but somehow falling further behind every month, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out, because today, I am not talking about skipping your morning coffee or downloading another basic budgeting app. I want to talk about the structural math trap that secretly drains your salary before it ever hits your checking account. And I know it because I have been exactly where you are standing right now. I remember the exact afternoon my boss pulled me into his office and offered me the promotion. He smiled and shook my hand. He told me I was finally hitting the big leagues, 6 figures. It is the magic number we are all taught to chase from the moment we enter the workforce. I walked out of that office feeling like I had conquered the world. I called my parents from my car. I told them I had finally made it. I genuinely believed my financial stress was over forever. I thought all my money problems were officially solved. But a month later, my first new paycheck hit my account. I stared at the deposit amount on my phone screen while sitting in traffic on my morning commute. I closed the banking app and opened it again. I refreshed the screen 3 times. I honestly thought the payroll department had made a massive mistake. The math simply did not make sense to me. I had literally doubled my starting salary, but the number hitting my checking account every 2 weeks had barely moved. It felt like a sick joke. That is what led me to my kitchen table on that Tuesday night. I started pulling apart my own life line by line. I looked at my pay stub. I looked at the new tax brackets. I looked at the new minimum payments on my student loans that had automatically adjusted upward because of my new income tier. I looked at the higher rent I was paying just to live close enough to commute to this new corporate office. When I was making $60,000 4 years earlier, I lived with a roommate. I drove an older car. Money was tight, but I usually had a few $100s left over at the end of every month to put into savings. Now I was making $120,000. On paper, I was wealthy. I was in the top tier of earners for my age group, but in reality, I was practically suffocating. I had exactly $84 left in my checking account, and it was still 5 days until my next payday. I felt like a complete fraud. I thought I was just terrible with money. I thought I was doing something uniquely wrong that everyone else in my office had somehow figured out. I blamed myself for not being disciplined enough. What I did not know yet was that I was not failing at all. I was actually functioning exactly as the financial system intended. I had walked blindly into a highly effective mathematical trap, a trap designed specifically for people who think they are finally winning the game. I did not have a name for it back then. When I finally went looking, I found out it was called the Income Adequacy Trap. I had been calling it the invisible squeeze for months. Turns out it already had a formal name. One night, while I was frantically searching online to figure out where my money was vanishing, I came across a massive data set. It was a joint study published in 2023 by 2 financial research groups called PYMNTS and Lending Club. I used to think that once I crossed 6 figures, the monthly financial stress would permanently disappear. I honestly thought people making that much money were completely immune to running out of cash before payday. Then I found their report showing that 51% of Americans earning more than $100,000 a year describe themselves as living paycheck to paycheck. I sat back in my chair and read that number out loud. More than half of the people in the 6-figure club, sitting roughly in the top 20% of household incomes, were exactly like me. They were sweating over their checking account balances, waiting for direct deposit to hit. Finding that statistic was a massive relief. I realized I was not uniquely terrible with money. Millions of people were trapped in the exact same cycle, but it also terrified me. If making $120,000 a year could not buy financial security, what actually could? I had to understand how the money was evaporating. So I printed out my last pay stub from my old $60,000 job. Then I printed out my first pay stub from my new $120,000 job. I laid them side by side on my kitchen counter. At first, I only saw this part, and I thought I understood it. I thought it was just standard taxes. Everyone knows you pay more taxes when you make more money. I knew my federal tax bracket was going up. I expected a bigger bite to come out of my check. But I had completely misunderstood how the corporate compensation system actually works. I was looking at the gross pay number on the top line. The gross pay is the marketing number your company uses to make you feel successful. The net pay at the bottom is the only reality that matters. When my gross pay doubled, I naturally assumed my take-home pay would roughly double too. When I made $60,000 a year, my gross monthly pay was $5,000. My take-home pay, after taxes and basic benefits, was around $3,800. When my salary jumped to $120,000, my gross monthly pay hit exactly $10,000. I expected my take-home pay to be around $7,500, but the actual number hitting my bank account was only $5,800. My gross salary had increased by 100%, but my actual take-home pay had increased by roughly 50%. A $60,000 raise on paper had immediately shrunk to a $24,000 raise in real life. I stared at the paper. I felt like someone had robbed me. I assumed the government was simply taking the entire difference. I was wrong. Taxes were only the very first layer of the trap. What I was about to find hiding underneath the tax line would change the way I looked at my career forever. I sat there staring at the two pay stubs on my kitchen counter. At first, I only saw this part, and I thought I understood it. I thought the government was just taking all my money. When my salary jumped from $60,000 to $120,000, I crossed into a new federal tax bracket. I expected my taxes to go up. But I had never actually modeled out the math of what a higher tax bracket combined with corporate deductions does to a real paycheck. Let me walk you through the exact numbers on that piece of paper. Because this is the part nobody warns you about when you are climbing the corporate ladder. On my old $60,000 salary, my gross monthly income was exactly $5,000. I paid my taxes. I paid my basic health insurance. I put 5% into my retirement account to get the company match. After all of that, about $3,800 landed in my checking account. Then I got the big promotion. My new gross monthly income was exactly $10,000. But my tax burden did not just double. It scaled up aggressively. I was suddenly paying significantly more in federal taxes. I was paying more in state taxes. And then I looked at the corporate benefits section. This is the silent killer of the six-figure salary. When I became a director, I was automatically enrolled in the executive benefit tier. My health insurance premium went up because the company stopped subsidizing as much of the cost for high earners. I was suddenly paying for mandatory long-term disability insurance. I was paying for extra life insurance that I never actually asked for. Then there was the retirement account. I was still putting the same percentage of my income into my retirement fund to get the corporate match. But because my salary had doubled, the actual dollar amount being pulled directly out of my check every month doubled too. Yes, that money was technically mine. It was building my net worth for the future. But I could not use it to pay my electric bill on a Tuesday. It was trapped behind a penalty wall. By the time the payroll department was done stripping away taxes, inflated insurance premiums, and retirement contributions, my $10,000 gross monthly paycheck was reduced to $5,800 in actual take-home pay. I grabbed a calculator and ran the final math. I had earned a $60,000 raise on paper. But after the system took its cut, I only received $24,000 of it. That meant my massive promotion actually boiled down to exactly $2,000 extra a month in real liquid cash. Do not get me wrong. $2,000 extra a month is real money. I was incredibly grateful to have it, but I had mentally budgeted my entire life based on a $120,000 salary. I was trying to live a $10,000 a month life on a $5,800 a month reality. I had fallen for the gross income illusion. I was measuring my financial success using a phantom number that I was never actually allowed to touch. But even then, $2,000 extra a month should have been enough to build a solid savings account. It should have been enough to stop living paycheck to paycheck. I told myself I just needed to be smarter with that extra money. But when I dug deeper into my bank statements, I found something that most people never notice. Taxes and corporate deductions were only the entrance fee to the trap. The real financial bleeding was happening somewhere else entirely. When I dug deeper into my bank statements, I found something that most people never notice. I was looking at the $2,000 extra a month that actually made it into my checking account. I told myself $2,000 was still a massive win. All I had to do was save it. But I had completely forgotten about the structural debt I was carrying. Like millions of other people, I had student loans. I borrowed the money to get the exact degree required to land this $120,000 corporate job. For years, I had my loans set up on an income-driven repayment plan. On my old $60,000 salary, my minimum student loan payment was exactly $250 a month. It was manageable. It was just another utility bill in my mind. I paid it on the first of every month and never thought twice about it. But income-driven repayment plans are a double-edged sword. When my salary doubled, the government was automatically notified of my new tax bracket, and my student loan servicer immediately recalculated my entire life. My new minimum monthly payment jumped from $250 to $850 a month. That was an immediate increase of $600 a month. That money was instantly wiped out from my new net raise. I used to think income-driven repayment plans were a safety net designed to help you get ahead. Then I found a 2021 study from the National Bureau of Economic Research. The researchers found that for many borrowers on these income-based plans, every extra dollar they earn results in an effective marginal penalty rate of over 70% when combined with new taxes. I read that study 3 times. For every new dollar I was supposedly earning, the combination of taxes, lost subsidies, and increased loan payments was automatically taking roughly 70 cents. I was fighting for corporate raises just to hand the money straight back to the institutions that issued my degree. It was a perfect, closed loop. The university charged me a fortune for the credential required to get the job. Then, the system scaled my debt payments to ensure my new salary simply serviced that exact same debt at a higher speed. I was not building wealth at all. I was just a highly paid debt servicer. I went back to my spreadsheet at the kitchen table. I started with my $2,000 actual monthly raise. Then I subtracted the new $600 increase in my student loan payment. I was left with just $1,400 of actual usable new money. Out of a massive $60,000 corporate promotion, I was taking home $1,400 a month in real lifestyle improvement. That was my grand prize. That was the money supposed to buy my financial freedom, secure my retirement, and let me finally breathe. I was sitting there feeling the walls completely closing in around me. The promotion I had worked 4 years to achieve was vanishing into thin air. I had traded late nights, weekends, and all my free time to become a director, and the financial reward was dissolving right in front of my eyes. But even then, I tried to stay positive. I told myself $1,400 a month was still forward progress. I could still use that money to build my emergency fund. I could still get ahead if I was just careful enough. And this is the part that took me years to figure out. The part nobody tells you about the true cost of climbing the corporate ladder. Because keeping that director title required me to make a geographical sacrifice that would wipe out every last penny I had left. And this is the part that took me years to figure out. The part nobody tells you about the true cost of climbing the corporate ladder. I was staring at the $1,400 I had left from my massive raise. I thought I could still use it to get ahead, but my new director title came with unspoken physical requirements. When I was making $60,000, I was a junior employee. I worked from home 3 days a week. I lived 45 minutes away in the suburbs with a roommate. My share of the rent was exactly $800 a month. But as a director, I had to be in the downtown headquarters 5 days a week. I had early morning strategy sessions. I had late dinners with clients. Commuting 2 hours a day was no longer physically possible. The job demanded my constant presence, so I had to move. I rented a basic 1-bedroom apartment a few miles from the office. It was not a luxury penthouse. It was just a standard apartment in a major metropolitan city. My new rent was $2,500 a month. That was an increase of $1,700 a month just for housing. Let us pause and do the math. I did at my kitchen table that night. My usable raise after taxes, corporate deductions, and my newly scaled student loan payments was $1,400 a month. My mandatory rent increase just to live close enough to do the job was $1,700 a month. I was officially negative $300 a month. Taking a promotion that doubled my salary literally made me poorer. And that was before I factored in the new daily costs. Parking at the downtown corporate garage was $200 a month. Taking the train home late at night when I was too exhausted to drive was another $100 a month. The geographic premium was not just about rent. It infected every single transaction. In my old neighborhood, I bought groceries and cooked dinner. In the downtown corporate district, a basic lunch was $18. Grabbing a coffee between meetings was $7. The entire ecosystem around the office was priced perfectly to capture the disposable income of six-figure earners. I was leaking money in 100 different directions just to survive my own work week. I used to think where you lived and how you commuted were just personal lifestyle choices. I thought anyone could simply choose to live cheaper. Then I found a 2022 study from the Brookings Institution analyzing urban economics. They found that workers in major metropolitan areas pay a geographic access penalty of up to 40% of their entire income just to physically participate in high-paying labor markets. I read that finding, and my stomach completely dropped. I was not paying for a luxury lifestyle. I was paying a mandatory access fee to my landlord and the city just for the privilege of holding a six-figure job. The high salary was a complete illusion. It was a geographic subsidy. The company paid me more money simply because it cost more money to exist near their building. The extra cash was never meant for me. It was meant to be passed straight through my bank account to the local real estate market. I was completely trapped. I could not move further away. Because the job required me to be in the office. I could not quit, because I had built my entire identity around reaching this level. I was working 60 hours a week, carrying massive responsibilities, and quietly going into credit card debt just to buy groceries. I sat at my kitchen table and realized my entire financial strategy had been built on a lie. I had assumed that earning more money automatically equaled keeping more money, but the system was perfectly calibrated to capture every single dollar of my upward mobility. I felt a profound sense of panic. I needed to know exactly how much this trap was going to cost me over the long run. I needed to see the total damage. I sat at my kitchen table and opened a blank tab in my spreadsheet. I needed to see what this trap was actually going to cost me over the rest of my working life. I ran two different scenarios side by side. Scenario one was the path I actually took, the $120,000 director job in the city. Scenario 2 was the mathematical alternative, staying at my $60,000 job in the suburbs with my roommate. I wanted to see the lifetime cost of my promotion. When I was making $60,000, I was not rich. But because my fixed costs were incredibly low, I consistently had exactly $400 left over at the end of every month. I used to invest that money. If I just kept that quiet suburban life and invested that $400 a month at a standard 8% annual return, the math over time is staggering. After 10 years, I would have accumulated roughly $73,000 in liquid accessible wealth. After 20 years, that account would grow to $235,000. And after 30 years, I would be sitting on almost $600,000. That is $600,000 of actual freedom. Money I could use to buy a house in cash, start my own business, or simply walk away from a job I hated. It was real wealth. Now, I looked at the column for my new $120,000 life. Because my increased rent, higher taxes, and adjusted student loan payments wiped out my entire raise, my monthly investable cash flow had dropped to exactly zero. I was making double the gross income, but my liquid wealth generation had completely stopped. After 10 years in the director role, my accessible wealth would be zero. After 30 years, it would still be zero. But the math gets so much worse when you look at where the money was actually going. I had to calculate the cash I was actively burning just to stay on the corporate treadmill. My mandatory rent increase to live near the office was $1,700 a month. Over 30 years, that equals $612,000 paid directly to a downtown landlord. My student loan penalty was $600 a month. Over 30 years, that is $216,000 handed back to the loan servicer just because my salary went up. When you add it all up, I was going to pay an $828,000 lifestyle tax over my career, just for the privilege of calling myself a director. I sat in the quiet of my kitchen and stared at those two columns. The guy making $60,000 a year was slowly but surely buying his permanent freedom. The guy making $120,000 a year was financing a massive machine that kept him running in place forever. The gap between those two outcomes was mathematically devastating. I was trading my entire financial future for a fancy email signature and a high-cost zip code. I was doing all the work, but everyone else was keeping the money. The full weight of the lifetime cost finally landed on me. I felt completely sick. I knew the math was real. I knew the only logical choice was to drastically change my life immediately. But when I woke up the next morning and put on my expensive suit for work, I found myself paralyzed. I kept walking right back into the office. That was when I finally understood why I kept getting stuck, even when I knew the right answer. That was when I finally understood why I kept getting stuck, even when I knew the right answer. I had the spreadsheet saved on my desktop. I knew I was mathematically poorer. But I still walked into the office every single morning and played the game. I was suffering from the upgrade illusion. When you earn $60,000 a year, you look at the directors making $120,000, and you assume they have it all figured out. You see the nice cars in the parking garage. You see the tailored suits. You assume those things are the reward for hard work. But when I got to that level, I realized those things were not rewards. They were uniforms. The corporate ecosystem is perfectly designed to exploit your psychology. When you get promoted to a high-paying role, the social expectations immediately shift. You are no longer just an employee doing a task. You are a representative of the brand. I experienced this exactly 2 weeks after my promotion. I was wearing the same basic gray suit I had worn for 3 years. It cost me maybe $200 off the rack at a discount store. I thought it looked fine. But my boss pulled me aside after a major client meeting. He did not yell. He was actually very polite. He put his hand on my shoulder. He told me I was a director now. He said I needed to project success. He told me I needed to look the part if the clients were going to trust us with their accounts. Then he suggested a specific tailor downtown where all the executives bought their clothes. I felt a massive wave of embarrassment. My face flushed hot. I felt like an imposter who had just been caught. I went to that exact tailor the very next day during my lunch break. I put 2 custom suits on my credit card. The total was $2,500. I justified it in my head immediately. I told myself it was an investment in my career trajectory. I told myself I had earned it. I told myself I deserved to look good because I was working 60 hours a week. But that was a lie. I was buying camouflage. I was spending money I did not actually have to convince people I belonged in a room I could not afford to be in. This is how the psychological trap closes around you. The higher you climb, the more expensive it becomes just to fit in with your own peers. If the rest of the management team goes out for a $60 lunch every Tuesday to discuss strategy, you cannot be the only director sitting in the break room eating a packed turkey sandwich. If your peers are driving luxury sedans to the weekend golf outings, showing up in a 10-year-old economy car starts to feel like a genuine career risk. You convince yourself that looking poor will cost you your next promotion. Your baseline expectations shift without you ever noticing it happening. What used to feel like an absurd luxury suddenly feels like a mandatory professional expense. And the psychological drain is constant. I was exhausted all the time. I was stressed about hiding my empty bank account from the people I managed. And because I was working so hard, I felt completely justified paying for convenience. I started paying for premium grocery delivery. I paid for an expensive dry cleaning service. I paid $40 a night for takeout because I was simply too tired to stand in my kitchen and cook at 8 o'clock at night. The system drains your time and your physical energy. Then the system sells your time and energy back to you at a massive premium. I was trapped in an endless cycle. I was earning more money just to spend more money on the coping mechanisms required to sustain the high-earning job. Let me say out loud the objection that is forming in your head right now, because it used to form in mine every single time I looked at my credit card statement. Let me say out loud the objection that is forming in your head right now, because it used to form in mine every single time I looked at my credit card statement. I used to tell myself this was strictly a spending problem. I thought my financial stress was entirely my own fault. I believed if I just stopped buying $6 coffees on my way to the office, everything would be fine. I thought if I stopped ordering expensive takeout on Friday nights, my bank account would magically heal. I blamed my own lack of discipline. I told myself I was just being lazy and entitled. I assumed anyone making $120,000 a year who was still broke was just a complete fool with their money. And I understand exactly what you are thinking right now. You are probably thinking I just needed to make a budget and stick to it. I pushed back against this idea for years. I downloaded every budgeting app on the market. I tracked every single penny, but then I actually ran the final numbers on my own discretionary spending. I added up every single coffee, every takeout meal, and every streaming subscription I paid for over an entire year. The total was roughly $3,500. That sounds like a lot of money, and it is. But remember the math from my kitchen table spreadsheet. My mandatory rent increase just to live near the corporate headquarters was costing me $20,400 a year. My newly scaled student loan penalty was costing me another $7,200 a year. Cutting out coffee was never going to save me. Even if I ate rice and beans for every single meal and never watched another television show, I would still be financially drowning. My problem was not variable discretionary spending. My problem was structural fixed costs. This is the counterintuitive truth that the traditional personal finance industry refuses to talk about. Financial gurus want you to feel guilty about buying a latte because it is incredibly easy to shame people for small daily pleasures. They sell you a story that your lack of willpower is keeping you poor. But the math tells a completely different story. You can cut your grocery bill in half and you will still be broke if your zip code is draining 40% of your net income. You can cancel every streaming service you own, but it will not make a single dent if your student loan servicer is legally taking a massive percentage of every new dollar you earn. We are taught to obsess over the $5 decisions while completely ignoring the $2,000 decisions. We exhaust all of our mental energy trying to save pennies on lunch, while the massive structural costs of our careers quietly empty our bank accounts while we sleep. The day I finally understood this difference was the day the heavy blanket of financial shame lifted off my shoulders. Once I realized my occasional takeout order was not the reason I was suffocating, the guilt completely vanished. I stopped trying to budget my way out of a structural math problem. You cannot budget your way out of a trap designed to capture your entire baseline income. I knew I had to stop attacking the symptoms and start attacking the foundation. I had to dismantle the trap from the inside out. I had to make a series of massive, uncomfortable choices to get my life back. I knew I could not just sit there and let the system slowly bleed me dry. I had to make a drastic change to my baseline expenses. I had to dismantle the trap from the inside out. The first thing I did was attack the geographic premium. I could not keep paying $2,500 a month just to live near the corporate headquarters. I walked into my boss's office on a Thursday morning. I told him I loved the director role and the responsibilities, but I also told him the mandatory 5 days a week in the downtown office was completely burning me out. I proposed a strict hybrid schedule. I agreed to be in the office Tuesday through Thursday for all the critical in-person meetings, but I demanded to work from home on Mondays and Fridays. He looked at my performance metrics and agreed. The second he approved it, I went home and broke my lease. I paid the penalty fee out of my tiny emergency fund. Then I moved 45 minutes outside the city back to a quiet suburban neighborhood. I found a basic one-bedroom apartment. My rent immediately dropped from $2,500 a month to $1,300 a month. Yes, my commute on those 3 days was brutal. It took me an hour and a half each way in heavy traffic. But that physical sacrifice instantly put $1,200 of real cash back into my checking account every single month. The second step I took was restructuring my student loans. I had to get off the income-driven repayment plan. It was acting like a massive penalty tax on my career growth. I called my loan servicer on my lunch break. I told them to take me off the income-driven tier immediately. I switched my account to a standard fixed repayment plan. Under the income-driven plan, my payment had spiked to $850 a month, and it was legally structured to keep rising every single time I got a corporate raise. By switching to a standard fixed plan, my monthly payment locked in at exactly $600 a month. It would never go up again, no matter how much money I made in the future. That single phone call saved me $250 a month immediately. More importantly, it capped my downside risk forever. I sat back at my kitchen table that night and ran my new spreadsheet. I was still making $120,000 a year. My gross income had not changed at all, but my fixed structural costs had violently dropped. By moving further away and fixing my loan payment, I had successfully clawed back $1,450 a month in pure liquid cash. For the first time since my promotion, my checking account was actually growing. The constant suffocating weight in my chest started to disappear. I was no longer living paycheck to paycheck on a six-figure salary. But I was not completely free yet. The trap still had one final psychological layer I had to dismantle. I needed a system to make sure I never fell back into the upgrade illusion again. I had successfully clawed back $1,450 a month, but I knew if I did not fix my mindset, I would just find a new way to spend it. The third thing I changed was my professional camouflage. I had to completely opt out of the corporate upgrade illusion. I stopped going to the $60 Tuesday lunches with the other directors. I sat in the break room and ate my packed sandwich. I went back to wearing my older off-the-rack suits. I simply stopped caring if I looked like the poorest guy in the executive suite. When my coworkers asked why I moved so far away from the office, I just smiled and told them I liked the quiet. I stopped trying to prove my income to people who were quietly carrying just as much financial stress as I used to carry. By cutting out the forced corporate socializing, the expensive lunches, and the constant dry cleaning, I found another $350 a month in my budget. My total reclaimed cash flow was exactly $1,800 a month. Here is what that actually looks like over time. Instead of handing that money to a downtown landlord and a loan servicer every month, I automatically routed it into an index fund. I set the transfer for the exact day my direct deposit hit. I never even let the money sit in my checking account, where I could be tempted to spend it. If you take $1,800 a month and invest it at a standard 8% annual return, the math completely changes the trajectory of your life. After 10 years, that account will hold roughly $330,000. After 20 years, it compounds to just over $1 million. I had literally salvaged $1 million retirement from the exact same salary, just by refusing to pay the geographic penalty and the lifestyle tax. I remember the exact morning I checked my account and saw I had finally saved $50,000 in cash. I was sitting at my same kitchen table. I looked at the screen and realized I could lose my director job the next morning and I would be completely fine for over a year. That deep feeling of safety was infinitely better than the temporary rush of buying a custom suit. The heavy stress I had been carrying in my neck for 2 straight years just melted away. I was finally building actual wealth, not just pretending to have it. I used to think a 6-figure salary meant I had finally arrived. But I learned the hard way that a high salary is not wealth. It is just a high-volume stream of cash passing through your hands. True wealth is the gap between what you earn and the fixed costs required to earn it. The system is perfectly designed to make sure that gap stays as small as possible. The system wants you to spend your raise immediately to prove you deserve it. You have to be willing to look less successful than your peers in order to actually become wealthier than them. That was the hardest lesson I ever had to learn. If this video helped you see your finances differently, I want you to hit that like button and subscribe. Every video I make is something I wish someone had told me years earlier. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.